Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Christy and I'm a second year PhD student studying English literature at the University of Westminster. And today I have a chatty video for you all because I would like to share my reflection on completing the 12-week program of The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably already know the gist about this, but essentially this is a 12-week program designed to help you unblock your creativity and embrace your inner artist, specifically a kind of more childlike inner artist within yourself. The two main components of this involve morning pages and an artist date. Now, in the context of how it's described within this particular book, the morning pages are something that you do as soon as you wake up in the morning before anything else. It's 3 pages and it's stream of consciousness. The artist date is meant to be a scheduled in intentional point in your week in which you are doing something fun, creative, whatever that looks like, but fun being specifically the element. And crucially, it is something you do by yourself. Some examples that we've had have included building Lego, have been knitting, have been going to a cafe and taking a book and reading for a few hours, have been going to the cinema by yourself, signing up for a creative workshop without signing up with somebody else you already know, for example. So there's elements within that that are still surrounding other people. There's a wide variety of what an artist date can look like, but the most important thing within it is the intention. One of the things that I found extremely helpful and why I have actually finished the 12 weeks is because when I decided I wanted to do this, I actually created a group over at Accepted Society for anybody else who wanted to join me in the process, and we had weekly check-ins, which were honestly the best part of the whole experience. It was fantastic. At the end of every week within the book, you have like just brief check-ins to do. And so we would share that vocally in terms of, have you done your morning pages? Have you done your artist date? What was the artist date? Which was also really great for inspiring others in terms of ideas for that. And also, crucially, reflecting on the thematics within the chapter. And that was such a huge component in The Artist's Way. I would not have completed this if it wasn't for the fact that I was hosting, to be fair, the group. And so I knew that I had to like get through it all. But those reflections and conversations we had, some of them going on for like over 2 hours, were so important and so meaningful in the relationships developed through that as well, because you really got to know another person and be vulnerable, and it's just beautiful. So I do highly recommend a kind of group setting if you're able to. It's also recommended towards the end of the book as well, but obviously not everybody does it in a group setting because you might not have that ability. But I would definitely say look in your friend group, see if anybody is interested in doing it with you, because having somebody to talk to about it is really helpful and gives you so much more insight and so much more to reflect on than just doing it by yourself. In terms of how I feel about the whole process, I have mixed feelings, and this is something that was shared within the group in and of itself as well. Did the book change my life? I would argue yes, because specifically the morning pages have been something that I would never have done if it wasn't for this, and now this has become such a crucial practice within my everyday life. It is my pulse check. It is something that I am so grateful for now as having as a habit, and has helped in reflecting on a lot more deep emotions. So yes, I would say that it changed my life in that aspect, as well as the playfulness and fun. I think that especially within the past few years, there's been quite a lot of traumatic things that have happened. I mean, throughout my entire life, but a lot more recently. It was very difficult for me to untangle my emotions around that and understand how I was feeling and how that was still impacting me despite X amount of time later. And so this has really helped in relation to kind of finding closure and finding ways creatively of expressing those emotions, embracing those emotions. So for the two big ones, clearly I've said that the morning pages have been the biggest takeaway for me. They were a struggle at the beginning because I, for one, chose an A5 standard A5 size notebook to do my morning pages, and 3 pages in this every single day is a lot. And what I was finding was actually it was too much. At the very beginning, I felt like I constantly had to have my pen on the page. I couldn't, like, it was stream of consciousness, and I had to just do it so incredibly exactly the way that the book says that you need to do it, that actually by week 4 I was basically burnt out from the morning pages, and I was experiencing a lot of joint pain. It became painful, physically painful, to do the morning pages. And once I started having a lot of the resistance to it, I realized I was then starting and stopping a lot, rather than like feeling like I need to do it perfectly. I still felt like I kind of needed to do it perfectly, but then I was failing at doing it perfectly because I was starting and stopping, and it would take me hours to complete. And it was just, I was like, I know that I'm going to lose this. Like, I can't maintain this. It's not sustainable for me. Another great thing about being in a group setting and talking to other people is realizing that everybody was feeling that way about the morning pages, especially anybody who's writing in an A5 size journal. If you're writing in like a pocket size journal, I feel like it was less intense, but there's so much understanding within everybody that once we all kind of voiced that this wasn't working for us, it's so much easier to express empathy, at least for me, to express empathy and support for another person, and saying, well, if this isn't working for you, you need to change it to adjust. That's one of the things about the book, is that it's very able-bodied. It doesn't take into account folk who have chronic illnesses, chronic pain, a variety of any kind of other medical issues, brain fog, fatigue, etc. It doesn't take into account neurodivergence. It's very limited in its scope of the kind of person that it is speaking about, but it can be adjusted. And that is the thing that I think is the biggest takeaway from this book, is you don't need to be perfect in the way that you're doing this. You need to do it in a way that suits you and that is sustainable for you. So, for example, for me, my morning pages tend to still be morning pages. I have my coffee and then I do my morning pages. They are really the first thing that I do, but I don't do 3 pages. I set a 20-minute timer and I write for 20 minutes. That has actually been brilliant for me, because no matter how much resistance I have, sometimes I always know that I can take 20 minutes out of my day to do the journaling. They have really helped in helping me get through some anxieties and just getting that out of my system. If I'm doing it inside, I just set my Pomodoro timer. If I go outside, which is my preferred way of doing my journaling, because I'm very lucky to live right by the beach, so why would I not take that opportunity? So if the tide's low, I go out and I write my morning pages, and if it's not raining. What I have recognized as well is that 20 minutes for me equates to 2 pages, which is fantastic. So sometimes if I don't have like my phone or something on me, I'll just say to myself, we'll write 2 pages, and that's essentially your 20 minutes. But the reason why I have said to myself 20 minutes rather than 2 pages, despite the fact that most of the time they're equivalent, is because what I realized in the first few weeks of doing the morning pages, with that whole like, I can't take my pen off the paper, is that it wasn't giving me the chance to pause. This is definitely more relevant, I feel like, when I'm outside. It's not a pause to think, because those thoughts do come out on the page. It's to silently observe, and there's not anything critical that's happening in that observation. I am just observing, and those moments are so important. The 20 minutes timer basically gives me permission to allow myself to have those pauses. And there are prompts and exercises within each of the chapters that then kind of come out through the morning pages as well, even if you're not doing the exercises exactly. Now, for the first 3 weeks, I was really diligent with the exercise. Again, I was trying to do everything perfectly. A lot of those exercises were beneficial, especially in terms of reflecting on insecurities and such that came up through childhood that maybe you haven't really realized where those origins or roots are. Or one of the earliest, I think task 1 is literally affirmations and blurts. So you're just write statements about yourself, and then you go through and reflect which ones are actually negative, and then you reformat or rewrite them as affirmations. And I found that was really powerful in terms of recognizing negative self-talk. Another thing that came up for me in this process was the understanding that I still have a filter when I'm journaling. If I was feeling emotions around a situation where I was hurt or frustrated, etc., I still wouldn't allow myself to be honest and authentic about those emotions, because I felt like I was still protecting an image of a person that I had from the past. By not allowing yourself to reflect on how you are feeling about the situation, you are also not allowing yourself to have closure or understanding, or even to understand how somebody else might have perceived the situation, because you're not allowing your emotions to exist fully. There's a block there in terms of your emotions, and that block is going to filter out through other areas of your life. Anyways, I found that that was really, really interesting and has inspired me as well for my journaling system going forward. But yes, this was my first morning page journal. Also, I think the first time I've ever actually filled completely a journal that isn't like a bullet journal, and so that's really nice. I keep these, I archive them, and now I have this very beautiful romanticized space for my journaling. This is a Louise Carmen journal, which I will show in another video. I have a updated journaling ecosystem video that will be coming either next week or the week after. When I purchased this, I purchased it with the notion that this is what its purpose was going to be. So like I embossed it with the word create. I have a sea glass journal charm that I have designed and created on here with one of my favorite pieces of sea glass. I have a little pearl that I was given at birth because apparently babies need pearl necklaces. I don't know. But it's been in a box my entire life, and I thought this is the perfect place for it because another component of the Artist Way is all about embracing and nurturing the childlike artist within you, but that also means the childlike wonder and joy and curiosity within you. Just quickly, this is my morning page journal that I have now. I do have a small pocket size diary for evening journaling because that's what I was doing before I actually started the Artist Way. Journaling wasn't a daily habit, but it was something that I was clearly consciously trying to practice more often, and so that was a good lead way into the Artist Way. And then this journal, which I don't have anything written in yet, but this is basically going to be my therapy journal. This is where I'm going to explore prompts, whether those be ones from the book that I haven't done already or just my own. It just gives you the space to let those emotions out and to get, for me, anxiety out of my head and onto a page. The pulse check aspect, it just really makes you reflect on how you're feeling every morning, of how you're starting your day, and if the previous day is, being brought into the current present day, those types of things. So honestly, it's my pulse check. I've also continued the group over at Accepted Society. So instead of calling it the Artist Way, it is now Living the Artist Way. And we continue to do our weekly check-ins because they were so brilliant during these 12 weeks, and it's become such a vulnerable, intimate space to share and reflect, and everybody's absolutely wonderful. So we continue to do the check-ins for morning pages and artist date over there, and also share prompts throughout weeks that people can reflect on within their morning pages or journaling if they so choose, and that we can then discuss during the check-ins. In terms of those prompts and exercises, like I say, the first 3 weeks I was doing them really well. Then after the 4th week, I kind of was just choosing ones that were working best for me. Week 4, I don't think I did any of them. And week 4 is the point where most people will fall off of this program, because if it wasn't for the group setting, that's when I would have stopped, because week 4 is the reading deprivation week, which obviously this was written ages ago in 1992. And so reading deprivation, like, media is all around us and pretty much impossible to do in the 21st century unless you're going on a retreat, like a silent meditative retreat for like a week or something. I think that is a way. Like, if you can schedule that in for week 4, brilliant. That's the way to go. It was useful, but it was also that was the week that made me reflect on how I was approaching the program, because I couldn't do it perfectly. There was no way to do it perfectly. Also, literally my job, PhD in English literature, I can't not read for an entire week. I did not enjoy that week. Nobody in the group enjoyed that week. Nobody fulfilled that week in the way that it was quote unquote meant to be fulfilled. But a lot of us did, again, adjust it to our own capacities. So there was a lot of, I called it consumption deprivation week, where you're trying to reduce your consumption, whether that's new television shows or engaging in like social media content, stuff like that. It was really kind of pulling back on that. The first 2 days when I was really like not, the only thing that I allowed myself to go on essentially was Accepted Society, and I was only allowed to do research, reading, work and things, was that when I went to bed, I'm somebody who scrolls before I go to bed, which is a terrible habit, I know, and I wasn't doing that. I was going straight to bed. But what I've realized was that as soon as I closed my eyes, I was essentially getting a real TikTok situation, the scrolling thing, visually, of just everything, whether that was videos I've previously had seen or life things. It was so bizarre, and it was genuinely just constant. It gave me such a bad panic attack. It was awful. I could not understand how that was happening. And that just goes to show how much stimulation we're actually getting before we go to bed. Like, we are not relaxing by scrolling on our phones before going to bed. It might feel mindless, but that is all stimulation. And that continues to happen now when I take those moments of like, right, we're not scrolling before bed. It's gotten better for sure because I do it more. I'm trying to read more before bed, despite the reading slump. So it's, difficult there. But I highly, highly encourage you to not scroll before you go to bed because that freaked me out. And the third day, though, I did allow myself to scroll before bed because I just like the anxiety of having that experience. It was definitely with a withdrawal type symptom. But I just was like, I cannot go to bed again and just have this like constant reel in my head. It was so bizarre. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that during the deprivation week if they did it, but that really opened my eyes. What else in here? I had some quotes that I put into the commonplace book that I want to remember. Julia Cameron writes, "Art is born in attention. Art may seem to spring from pain, but perhaps that is because pain serves to focus our attention onto details. But it is the attention to detail that stays with us. The singular image is what haunts us and becomes art." And I thought that was a beautiful element, which is kind of why I try to really take time now to embrace kind of core memories that are joyful and reminding myself that that attention to detail can also come from really beautiful, wonderful, amazing, happy, gorgeous moments, but then also recognizing how we look at pain and how we perceive pain and how we either can feel like we're able to move on from the pain or not move on from the pain and remain stuck in the pain. That quote in and of itself, I feel like is something that just I reflect on a lot. Another quote that I have highlighted here is, "Do what intrigues you, explore what interests you. Think mystery, not mastery." And that again speaks a lot to the perfectionism element here that I have highlighted because obviously as a PhD student, you're becoming the expert within your field, right? We even call, again, the degree prior to it as a master's. You're supposed to be having mastery over this specific topic, this specific area of your research that you are specializing in. But actually, the thing that will propel you forward within a project like a PhD that is multiple years long, and it is the hardest level of educational degree that you can get, is not about being perfect and knowing everything, because what you will discover is that you cannot know everything. It is so true in that once you do a PhD, the more you know is the less you know. Like, I felt so confident after my master's. I felt like I was a master of the field. I knew what I was talking about. And then you do a PhD and you're like, I had no idea what I'm talking about. All of the time. I know nothing. And so actually reframing it and saying, no, I'm not trying to become a master of this. You're not going to become a master in 4 years. And even if you consider all the education prior, you can have a specialism. You can understand the field you are working within, but there always has to be that element of mystery. Mystery is what is, and curiosity is what is going to propel you forward within the context of the degree and allow you to get to a point of completion, because it's the curiosity and the mystery that makes us wonder and makes us want to know more, makes us want to engage with whatever project we're doing. I think that anybody who's going into this knows that this book talks a lot in terms of God, creator, is very spiritual based thread that goes throughout the entire book. However, especially in the newer edition, it speaks to the fact you don't have to be religious to be taking anything away from this book. You can mentally edit it in a way as you're reading. It was helpful in having those weekly check-ins and kind of seeing how other people were reading the book, whether they be anybody who were religious or spiritual or who were like, no, I absolutely don't engage in it in that context in any way. But I do feel like I found a lot more interesting kind of philosophical thoughts that were coming to me in relation to spirituality and connection, specifically in relation to the environment. That is where I found myself gravitating towards more, especially like being by the sea. I definitely think that if that's something that worries you, you can still absolutely read it and get a lot from it, but just go into it knowing that you have to have that mental editing process. And if you are a spiritual person, you are a religious person, I do still think that there are really new insights that can come from the text and just something to be aware of. The cons, however, in this book that I and the rest of the group that were in these weekly check-ins with me had, specifically related to, I think it was chapter 8 or something. Oh, we popped off in our discussion. It was such an infuriating read and felt like it was so contradictory to literally everything that the book was standing for. She devotes an entire chapter to basically saying that anybody can be an artist, but then that chapter basically says anybody can be an artist except for academics. Like, academics are not artists, they're not creative, they're just critical. That's it. Academics are the enemy of the artist is essentially what she's saying. Obviously, the group that I was hosting over at Accepted Society, we are all academics. We're all academics engaging in the artist way and not necessarily finding the creativity, because we all know that the practice of research and the work that we are doing is creative at its core. But I also do think that it was very interesting to see how that creativity was acknowledged and recognized within humanity fields versus STEM fields, and how actually the STEM fields were noting the discovery of finding that playful, joyful, artistic side within the research that they're doing that I think humanities already has a firm grip on, but that sometimes humanities, I feel, has an insecurity about because of the way that we view soft degrees versus hard degrees, etc. And that, like, the vocabulary that we're using within academia then has this effect within the disciplines themselves. There's so much to be learned from the communication and interdisciplinary relationships between the degrees that one can learn from one another. And so that was really insightful. But this chapter about academics not being creative was just infuriating. And also that essentially every single academic is then a shadow artist, because if you're studying English literature, what you actually want to do is to become a writer, which, to be fair point, I do want to be a writer one day down the line, but that's not why I'm engaging with the research. I'm engaging with the research because I'm exploring new ways of imagining the possibilities of futures for humanity and the planet that we live on and the interrelations between. There's a creative aspect within that. And I do think it's interesting because I'm reading currently, it's called The Limit of Critique by Rita something, I think, in relation to my research. She introduces or proposes this idea of post-critical reading and how there's an embodiment of feeling that needs to come back into the way that we are engaging with work, and not just finding the negative thing and showcasing that and saying that this is the whole entire point of every single literature, but actually looking at the creativeness within these ways of observing and looking at text and then seeing where that comes from. Post-critical, I'm not sure if I'm totally on board on that exact phrasing, because there's still a critical aspect that comes into play. But this is all to say that academics are creative people, and by saying that they're not, you're fulfilling a stereotype that then can have knock-on effects and actually perpetuating that within academia. Research is such a creative process. You literally are trying to, especially within a PhD, you're creating new knowledge. That is the whole point of your thesis, is to prove that you can contribute to the field something new, something creative. You have to create. Like, it doesn't make any sense to say that academics are not artists. And so many of, like I say, the academics that are within the space of this group that we're doing, like, we were actively seeking out even more creative ways to have space for that creativity, because we also know that that does benefit the research that we're doing in terms of exploring other means of thinking and engaging with the world around us. And so, yeah, I, along with everybody else in the group, really did. I think it was chapter 8, I'm not 100% sure. It was also really, that was probably one of the most fruitful discussions that we had. That was a really, really important conversation, and it was also one where we did reflect more on the playfulness and fun of the process. This was a conversation in which we said, yes, we're obviously academics are artists. If ever, to be fair, also, again, it was just so contradictory in saying that everybody can be an artist, but basically academics can't. But academics are so creative, but that academia as an institution tends to stamp out a lot of the creativity within us and stamps out a lot of the fun that comes from what we do. So a lot of folk will go into a PhD, myself included, so excited, so thrilled, so ready, to just get stuck in and we want to enjoy the process. It's something that we've wanted to do for a long time, but then you get in it and there's so many things happening. There's the deadlines, which contributes to the whole workaholism aspect, saying like, well, I can't do this and this because I have a deadline, because I need to be working all the time. And it doesn't help the conversation in terms of how a PhD student is considered or stereotyped within the mind, especially within a traditional academic setting. And you still have professors and supervisors who definitely still follow that mentality as well, that then translates to their students. There's definitely a stamping out of creativity and fun within academia as an institution. However, that does not mean that the academic is the uncreative critic that doesn't engage with the art in a creative way, but actually it's about finding that again within yourself despite all the noise of academia as the institution, and recognizing that that playful fun aspect of the process is so critically important to be able to change the way that academia is engaged with, but also how it is perceived. So that was actually a really interesting outcome from that chapter, but that didn't come from the chapter itself. It came from discussions reflecting on the chapter, which is why I think a group setting is so important. Or even just a pair, like I say, if you just have a friend, having somebody to communicate and discuss these thematics. In terms of the big takeaways, I said it was the group reflections and the discussions that came from that, the ability to kind of let go of the perfectionism in understanding that I could adapt the morning pages and the artist dates in ways that suited me, specifically the morning pages in and of themselves being the biggest thing, as well as the group reflections, but the morning page is probably the most significant takeaway for me. I am so grateful that this has now become a practice that I do daily in my life, and like I say, it is now my pulse check. And then also another big takeaway is finding the playful joy in things, that curiosity, the ability to try something new. It feels silly to allow ourselves to play in a way that we would not feel silly or think about in any secondary way as a child. Bringing more play back into my life has been something that I'm still working on because I don't feel like it comes naturally. It's really been insightful in terms of bringing that childlike joy back. I think that concludes my thoughts on The Artist's Way. I do recommend the book, genuinely. But I recommend, like I say, doing this with another person at least, so that you can have somebody to reflect with it on. And I do feel like I agree with a large majority of people who feel like this book has changed their lives. I do feel like it has changed my life in terms of really incorporating a practice that I have wanted to do for so long and that have just hesitated to do it because I just couldn't get started with the journaling aspect. So go into it and understand that there are things that you're going to take away from it that's going to work for you. And maybe it's different, the things that worked for other people, but there's also things that are just not applicable within the context of the world we live in today. And the fact that this is written for a very specific kind of individual that doesn't necessarily reflect people's experiences. And so just keep that in mind. I also ended up picking up The Artist's Way for retirement for my mother-in-law because she's going to be retiring next month. I think that this is also a really interesting gift that you could give other people in your life, especially this particular one. I'm not reading it because I'm nowhere near retirement, so I'm hoping that she'll enjoy it and I'm hoping that it's good. Again, there is more like a spiritual, faith-based aspect within this one as well, but if you have anybody in your life who's retiring soon, this is also a really great gift in terms of having more of that time for yourself, because I think a lot of us become anxious when we have time for ourselves. That's something that I have been inspired to gift onward to somebody else within my life, having followed The Artist's Way for myself. I think it's been a really beautiful practice. I do hope that this has been helpful. I really recommend at least looking into the morning pages and the artist dates, even if you're not interested in reading the book itself. I'm sure that you can find other resources in regards to those two like core elements of the 12-week program. But like I say, it's just the morning pages and the artist date, which I explained at the beginning of this video. So I highly encourage you to give that a go. Thank you all so much for watching and for hanging in here until the very end of this video. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day ahead of you. Bye!